All right, everyone. So we now have all of the detailed information regarding the fusion, including the list of champions needed. And I'm actually quite surprised. I took a look at this list of champions, and there are some really good rares and epics part of this fusion. In fact, I would even say, especially if you are more early to mid-game focused, you might want to focus on some of these rares and epics if you don't have them, rather than really going too crazy on the legendary himself. So I wanted to go through the list of rares and epics that are worth considering going for a part of this actual fusion, and then really get into more of the details about the fusion himself, because we now actually have the list of events here. If you take a look at the news page, kind of the overall timeline of these events. Really important, if you are going for the legendary, make sure that you guys spend the 15 to 20 minutes or so planning this out so you don't find yourself in that really uncomfortable situation where you might accidentally miss out one of these little events here, and then you're one champion short of completing the fusion. It is a major headache. Don't find yourself in that situation, so definitely take a few minutes to kind of plan this out. And I wanted to end off talking about the 10 times rates event for Dark Elves that we are actually going to be getting as well. So if you want to pull a couple of shards, maybe just to test your luck, I think a lot of you guys already know at this point kind of how I feel about most of these 10 times events. I wouldn't go too crazy, but if you want to pull a few shards here, I'll give you guys my opinions and kind of what I would do. So let's get into the actual champions for this fusion here and talk about some of those really good rares and epics that are the sub-fusion for the legendaries. So let's start off with the rares here, and right off the bat, no-brainer here, the rare that you absolutely want to make sure that you have somewhere in your vault or your roster is Frozen Banshee. Frozen Banshee is phenomenal. I would say probably the most used rare champion still in endgame players' rosters, and easily in the top 3 to 5 overall best rares in the game. So if you take a look at her skill kit, the reason why she is so good is uniquely she has this poison sensitivity. Right now, no other champion in the game has this, but very importantly as well, not only are you going to be getting a bunch of extra damage from your poison, but once she applies that poison sensitivity, she's also going to start applying a bunch of poisons from her regular skill 1, which of course doesn't have a cooldown. So you can actually pretty much get all your stacks of poison and poison sensitivity just from Frozen Banshee alone. So very, very good champion. That's without even really getting into her second ability here, which fills the turd meter. It seems like she doesn't actually end up using this in certain auto instances, which is probably good for speed tuning and whatnot, but she is just phenomenal. Easily one of the best rares in the game, and you will see some crazy damage numbers from her when it comes to things like the clan boss. So that's going to be number 1 on the list. Next up is Soulbond Bowyer. Now, Soulbond Bowyer is this champion right here, and Soulbond Bowyer is just a very solid DPS rare. She's a part of the Barbarians faction, so if we go to Soulbond Bowyer, if you take a look at her skills, attacks all enemies, which is nice that she has that on her actual skill 1 here without a cooldown, has an additional 25% chance of inflicting a critical hit. You'll notice that as a theme throughout her other skills as well. Second ability, attacks one enemy, has a additional 25% chance of inflicting a critical hit, will ignore 75% of the target's defense. That's really nice. That means that your damage numbers from this skill are going to be really high from ignoring the enemy defense. And her third ability, attacks one enemy, has an additional 25% chance of inflicting a critical hit. So that theme of additional 25% extra critical hit also means it's going to be a lot easier to build her to be crit capped. Also has a 75% chance, which you can boost with skill books, of fully depleting the target's turn meter. So also has that additional crit rate in all battles as her aura. Very solid DPS based rare champion. You can see some crazy damage numbers from her. Next up on the list of rares that I would consider from this fusion is Bulwark. Bulwark is actually the very last champion in this list right here. He is a Void, and let's see, going to his actual skill kit here, Bulwark has some really unique things about him. So first of all, he does have a weaken on his auto attack. Pretty difficult to find weaken on champions auto attack. It's a very powerful debuff to have. It is the weaker version of it, but he also has a lot of other things going for him as well, including an HP burn. And it's pretty difficult to find HP burn on champions, especially rares. I know Coffin Smasher is probably the other rare champion that also has a very good skill kit, kind of in a bit of competition with Bulwark, but having the weaken on his auto attack as well as having an HP burn, and also his passive here of extending the duration of all debuffs, this combination of 3 useful features of a rare champion, very, very good. Definitely going to be worthy of having this guy in your clan boss team, and absolutely going to be one of the rare champions worth going for, part of this fusion. He also has his increases allied defense in all battles by 17%. So next up on the list is a champion probably not talked about a whole lot, but definitely a very, very solid rare, and that is Haruspex. It's going to be this guy right here, another Void champion. And Haruspex is, you know, he's kind of like Apothecary in a weird way because he shares one of Apothecary's abilities, but he's going to be like the poison version of Apothecary. So you'll see what I mean by that in a second. Attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 15% chance of placing a 2.5% poison. His second ability, so this is kind of like the skill that's similar to Apothecary, right? Fills the turn meter of all allies by 15%, places a 15% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns, 5-turn cooldown. You can get that down to a 3-turn cooldown. Just as comparison here, if we actually go to Apothecary, you'll see it's this skill right here, right? It's similar, not quite exactly the same, but places a 30% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns, fills the turn meter of all allies by 15%, also a 3-turn cooldown. So that's kind of what I meant by that. Now, going back to his third ability right here, revives a dead ally with 30% HP and fills their turn meter by 30%, and increases ally speed in the arena by 15%. So definitely a solid rare to have on your roster, especially if you are newer. Definitely going to be worth going for, part of this fusion. And last up on this list here is Ragemonger, which is another Void. It's going to be this champion right here. Probably, I don't know if I would say the worst out of these 5 rares that I mentioned, but probably the least important. You know, if you're really new, definitely not a bad champion to have on your roster at all. You will probably outgrow him at, you know, some point in the game, though, but he's just a solid overall, you know, rare. Attacks an enemy, 7.5% continuous heal on this champion for 1 turn if crit. Attacks all enemies 2 times. Each hit has a 50% chance of placing a 2.5% poison debuff for 2 turns. Attacks one enemy has a 40% chance of placing HP burn. So he does have that HP burn, which is really, really nice because again, it can be difficult to find that. And of course, HP burn is going to be unique from poison. You only need 1 HP burn though when it comes to things like the clan boss. So no need for multiple HP burn champions. His aura increases ally attack in campaign battles by 21%. So that's the list of rares that I would consider going for, you know, from the sub-fusion champions, especially if you don't plan on going for the legendary himself. Now, in terms of the actual epics, there's 2 out of these 4 epics that I would really consider going for. And the first one is Catacomb Counselor. This guy right here is actually pretty good. He's got 1 skill in particular about him that makes him really good, and it's actually going to be his 3rd skill. So it's skill 1, 50% chance of placing an increased attack buff, and then attacks. Skill 2 attacks 1 enemy 3 times, heals by 20% of the damage. But it's his 3rd ability, Army of Death, teams up with 3 random allies to attack a single enemy. The allies joining the attack will use their default skill. So this is a great DPS rush type ability, especially for things like the arena or even the clan boss. Really, really nice ability to have, and especially if you're newer, if you don't have a champion kind of like this, or you have, you know, you don't have like a counterattack or a rush type ability. Really, really nice to have. And next up, the other epic that I would focus on is Umbral Enchantress. She is pretty decent. You know, again, probably not the absolute top tier of epic champions, but if you are newer, not a bad champion to have in your roster. Attacks one enemy. Damage increases as current HP decreases. Of course, she is defense-based as well, which is really nice. She's going to be tanky and do a good amount of damage. Second ability, attacks all enemies, has an 80% chance of placing block buffs debuff for 3 turns. And her third ability here, attacks all enemies, has an 80% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 2 turns, places an unkillable buff on this champion for 2 turns, places a block cooldown skills debuff on this champion for 5 turns. The block cooldown skills debuff cannot be resisted or blocked and cannot be removed. So pretty solid choices here. The other two, Fang Cleric and Seneschal, probably not as big of a focus to really work on, but overall, you know, especially if you are early mid-game or you don't really feel like going for this legendary, there are a lot of solid choices through the actual rares and epics to focus on. So this fusion event is surprisingly not just about the legendary, lots of other stuff going on. Now, let's take a look at some of the actual important information through the timeline here. So again, if you are going for the legendary, make sure that you guys spend a little bit of time going over this so that you don't make the mistake of accidentally missing out. But I did notice that there are 2 artifact enhancement events in this actual fusion calendar. Very important to note that is because, especially if you're limited on silver, make sure that you guys plan out your silver accordingly for the second artifact enhancement event, because it is for Fencer, which is a champion for Catacomb Counselor, and Catacomb Counselor is the only epic out of the 4 where you can't actually get him directly. So if you miss out on Fencer because you don't have the silver for the second artifact enhancement events, there's no other way to get Catacomb Counselor, and you find yourself with just a really, really big headache. So definitely make sure to plan around that accordingly. Now, there are 2 really big events going on here. One of them is pretty typical that we've seen with pretty much every major fusion, and it actually just started up. That's the Champion Training event. We have a 2-week Champion Training event, 30,000 points. Pretty typical, of course, a bunch of the rares needed for the fusion. Fang Cleric as a whole, if you decide to go for over 20,000 points. And if you go even further, of course, you can get a Void and a Legendary Skill Tome. But very importantly as well is tomorrow, we also have a Dungeon Divers event starting up as well. And if you go to the news tab, you'll see that the Dungeon Divers has a pretty long duration. So it's probably going to be a big Dungeon Divers, you know. I would guess 8,000 points, maybe 6,000 to 10,000, something in that range. So you've got 2 really big things to work on, Champion Training and Dungeon Divers. And the great thing is there's actually overlay between those 2, because when you're a Champion Training and farming in the actual campaign, the artifacts that you get in the campaign will actually count towards the Dungeon Divers event as well. So my recommendation, those of you guys who are watching this video very shortly after that it is released, I would probably not go too crazy on the Champion Training right now, like just within the next day or so, until this Dungeon Divers actually starts up, because then you'll not only get credit for your Champion Training points, but you'll also get credit from those artifacts from the campaign for Dungeon Divers as well. So just a little thing that I would note if you guys value things like efficiency. Now, we do have a Summon Rush starting up tomorrow as well. Of course, we have that 10 times rates event for Dark Elves, and I'll show you guys this little screen here one more time. If you take a look, we've got 8 champions from the Dark Elves that are going to be featured. The L are legendaries, of course. The E are epics, and the orange is from Ancient and Sacred Shards, and of course the purple is from Void Shards. So you can see here that we've got 4 legendaries that are from Ancient and Sacred Shards, and 1 just regular epic from Ancient and Sacred Shards. And then the Void Shards have 1 legendary featured and 2 epics. Now, I did notice that Lua and Sylar are both very, very, very good Void epics to have. And another thing to note is that it's very difficult with these summoning events to really kind of aim for legendaries. I mean, the chance to get legendaries is so low, even with 10 times chances. But if there are some very, very solid epics that are out there in these 10 times events, that's a consideration to make. So if I were to pick between Ancient Sacreds and Voids, I would probably, and again, I would not go crazy on this. Like I say, with all 10 times events, most people definitely going to be better to save for a ×2 event. And I think that a ×2 event's probably going to be coming up within the next couple of weeks or so. That's just speculation. But if you're a whale and you're just missing, some of these champions in this list of Dark Elves, okay, sure, go for it. But most people, you really want to get your maximum efficiency for your shards and save them for double rates. But if you want to see if you're the chosen one, just pull a couple of shards. My pick would probably be Void Shards, because Lua and Sylar are epics, which means, of course, higher chance to get them than legendaries. You might actually get them instead of really hoping for those very low percentage odds of getting legendaries. Also, Voids are going to give you a decent amount of points for this upcoming Summon Rush as well, which is part of the Fusion events. So it's nice to know that Voids, I believe they give you 120 points, whereas Ancient Shards only give you 20. So that would be my little pick right there. But, you know, just kind of wanted to end off talking a little bit about this. Am I going to be doing summons? Probably not. I might pull a couple of shards, but it's unlikely unless something crazy, new information pops up about the summoning event, or maybe there's some crazy rewards from the Summon Rush. Probably unlikely I'm going to really go too crazy, and I would probably recommend most of you guys do the same as well, and if you do summon only a couple of shards. To end things off here, this fusion, you know, overall, there's a lot going on here. Even if you are not an endgame player, you've got those rares and epics that you can work on. So the endgame players probably going to be working on the actual new legendary champion. The more early to mid-game players, you can work on the rares and the epics. So don't just think because you might not actually need the legendary that this fusion and all of the events are worthless, because there's a decent amount of other stuff going on here as well. So with that all being said, though, I think that's pretty much going to be it for the video. I threw a lot of information at you guys today, so I'm going to end things off here. If you enjoyed this video and you want more videos like this in the future, consider subscribing to the channel. Feel free to leave a quick like as well. It means more than you can imagine. And more Raid Shadow Legends videos, guides, tutorials, fun stuff should be popping up. Feel free to check it out. If not, till next time, this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.